Simone, thank you for engracing us with your beautiful presence tonight. We're so very happy you're here. And I have my timer with me today, so I'm not going to talk too much like I usually do. I'm controlling myself. Tonight's gospel moment is chapter 18, item 6, and it reads, "Not all those who say, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who have done the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? And did we not perform many miracles in your name?' And I will tell them clearly, 'Away from me, you who have done deeds of iniquity.'" Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. So item 6 reminds us the need of walking the talk, really. Jesus calls out specifically to the preachers, the teachers, the helpers of the gospel in this passage, and he reminds us the importance of really having a pure heart and actually truly acting on the words of Christ. He reminds us that only those with a Christian conduct will reach the kingdom of heaven. So what exactly does he mean by kingdom of heaven? And the passage, item 6's passage specifically tells us that the tranquility, the peace, the balance that we're so longing for, that will fulfill our lives, will only come if we really put the words of the Christ into practice. And it specifically comes to talk to us, really. It resonates very much with the people that come here, right, and talk to us every time. The people that are helping out in the center, be it in any type of action, the mediumistic activities or the passes, or even selling the food, right? So it comes to remind us that if we don't have a true, pure heart, and if we don't put all of that the loving words that we learn here in the center into action, that really we won't reach that inner peace that we're so longing for in this incarnation and in the incarnations to come. And so since this one was really an easy passage, I wanted to talk to you guys. I wanted to bring a really great example of a preacher who really walked the talk, a preacher who is known all over the world and is very well respected amongst all religions, and that is Saint Francis of Assisi. I'm sure you know his prayer, but you may not know his beautiful life work and how much he had to endure in order to really put the words of his prayers into true action. And so I want to tell you guys just a little bit about him, a very, very brief summary. He was born very rich, actually. So Saint Francis was the son of a wealthy merchant, and his mom was also from a very wealthy family. And like any young man of his time, he dreamt of knighthood and of nobility. So he wanted to go to war and again gain success and be very successful. So he ended up going into war, but he failed. So he became a prisoner of war, and he became very ill as well. So he contracted malaria. And so throughout that 1 year that he was going through that very painful moment of his life, it really made him question and think about what the meaning of his life was. And so after he came back to his hometown, Assisi, they actually ended up giving him back because they received this ransom. He went to this church that was destructed, and he started getting these visions, right? And we know from Spiritism, we know very well what those are. So he got this vision from Christ telling him, "Francis, go out and repair my house." And at that time, little did he know, Francis, that he actually took it literally and started fixing that church. But little did he know the work that was ahead to come, right? So St. Francis actually had a big revolution in the Catholic Church at that time, who was very powerful, very much thinking about a lot of luxury, right? So we just going back and thinking about like the 1100s, we have a lot of churches that are full of gold and things like that, and how the leaders of the time were so much in connection with power, right? Wanting power and things like that. So right away, going back to the life of St. Francis at that moment, he ended up selling some of his father's materials And then his father, who was at the time thinking that his son was going crazy because he was getting all these visions, right, immediately shamed him in front of the whole town and disowned him, disinherited him. And so at that moment, that was when St. Francis took a vow of poverty and told his father that was in the middle of the square in his town, and he told his father, right now I have one Father who is in heaven, and I will follow his will. And so he took off all his clothes. Very memorable action in St. Francis' life. So he took off all his clothes and gave it to his father, and took this vow of poverty and went on to help lepers, the outcasts of the society at that time. So he hugged them, he kissed them, he cleaned his wounds, he really cared for them, and started also a life of meditation and prayer, and really right away, he started to beg for money again, still kept on into building that church. But people started to see that Francis loved everything that God created, that even the animals, and we see a lot of pictures of St. Francis as teaching and preaching to the birds and to the animals. And there are many stories about how he loved even the scariest predators of the town, like a wolf. There's another very interesting story there too. But anyways, so Francis's incredible charisma and Christ-like actions drew thousands of people to start following him. In the beginning, people thought that he was crazy, and called him names, his friends from when he was young. And this stayed also in his city, so it's not like people didn't know him. Everybody knew him. And like I said, he devoted his life to the poor, to the people in need. And again, a lot of people that are now called the Franciscan friars started to follow him and started to do, to serve, to live this life of servitude like him. So I think that, to summarize, I think that he taught us love. Not only did he talk to us about love, but he also loved, right? So he loved God, and he loved all of God's creations. He loved anybody, children, women, men. And he also not only talked about benevolence, but he actually acted on it by serving the poorest of the poor, by taking care of the sick, by inspiring many to do the same thing that he did. And he also taught us humility. So he again took a vow of poverty and really detached from all these material things that had been given to him in this incarnation. So think about how difficult that must be. And then the resignation, he taught us a lot of resignation. He also, think about it, he actually took off all his clothes. There's a lot of stories about how he went to talk to the Pope barefoot. So he used to walk barefoot. So think about how painful that must have been, so just to be resigned so much into the love of Christ's actions, that you'd be walking barefoot and going through that type of pain. And again, he also suffered a lot through his death, and there's a lot of passages about him singing, through his discarnation. And also forgiveness. He not only talked about forgiveness, but he forgave a lot of the people, right, that actually treated him badly, especially during that time that they were calling him crazy. But anyways, St. Francis was a preacher, who inspired us to love God, because again, he loved everything that God created. He taught us to serve and help the most needy, and to work on our moral development by our thoughts, words, and actions. I'm not saying that we all need to go out and become and do the same thing that St. Francis was doing, right? Obviously, we may not even be at the spiritual level that he was, right? I'm not saying, I know I'm not, but I'm not saying go out and take a vow of poverty, give out all your material belongings, right? But all I'm saying is, I think that, and this is my opinion, I think that if we pay attention to his prayer, I know all of us here know his prayer, right? But if we can put into these words of his prayer into action in our daily lives every day, I am sure that we're going to have a much more fulfilling and peaceful incarnation, this incarnation and also many incarnations to come. Thank you.
Thank you.